Welcome to Grow Good, a place to spread joy, beauty, and goodness, to bear good fruit, a place where others can meet or be inspired to meet God. So get cozy, lean in, and listen close. Miracles are at work, and He wants to meet you too. Hi, friends, and happy Tuesday. I hope you've had a great week so far. I am very excited to share with you today a conversation with Rachel Wong of the Feminine Genius podcast. Her story is truly incredible. When I say miracles are at work, man, this is one example of how the Lord when we allow Him to enter into our hearts, can just work wonders. It's so inspiring. I really hope you guys all enjoy it as much as I did. And just, listen to His goodness today and let it lift you up. I did also want to just give a heads up that Rachel goes into sharing pretty vulnerably about the darkness that she has felt at times in her life. So I wanted to give a heads up for any little ears that might be around, or for anybody else who may be struggling with mental health issues or struggling with thoughts of suicide. Rachel briefly shares her own struggles with this. So if you or someone you know is struggling from these thoughts or feelings, please reach out for help. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. So without any other further delay, please enjoy this incredible story of redemption and transformation from Rachel Wong. Rachel, hello. Welcome.
Hi, Rachel. Oh, thank you. I'm going to have to get used to that, like talking to another Rachel. Hello.
I know, we both are named Rachel. So this will be funny. But how are you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing so well. The sun is shining where I am, and it's a beautiful day. Spending time with family, getting work done, chatting with you. It's a good day already. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for coming on and being part of this project. Could you start us out with just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Rachel. I'm living in Vancouver, Canada at the moment. And I do a myriad of things. Like, I just finished school and I studied communication at Simon Fraser University. I currently work at the university as well, doing marketing for one of our community engagement offices. And I'm also the host of the Feminine Genius podcast. So that's kind of been my baby for the past year. And it's been such a beautiful journey of faith and just being able to meet amazing women. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And that's beautiful, and a good segue into our conversation, just to find out how you got to where you are today and how you got to starting the Feminine Genius podcast. But before we get there, would you mind starting us out by giving us a little bit of background on your faith journey and just when you first remember encountering God?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was born and raised in the Catholic faith. I was going to church from a young age, and I went to Catholic elementary and high school all throughout. So in many ways, Jesus and faith and this knowledge of God had always been part of my life and really imprinted onto me. So I had a very good head knowledge of who God was, or so I thought. And we were taught from a young age, whether it was at Mass or in religion class, that God loved us and God had a plan for us. But what I noticed was that there was a lot of discrepancy between what I was hearing and also what was happening in my own life. So as I was going through school, I was bullied a lot, and that led to, like feelings of depression and a lot of anxiety. And I think that, coupled with really feeling like my self-worth and my identity was tied to my output and productivity, it really led me to this precarious place where I was just like, I will only be loved if I do well or if I succeed. So kind of like those two things working in tandem, kind of working against me, really led me to just experiencing a lot of depression, anxiety, and at one point really having some suicidal ideation as well. And that all led me away from the church. Now, I would still continue to go to Mass just because I knew that my parents would be furious with me if I didn't. And like being the eldest of three, I had to set an example, so to speak. But certainly, like all of the things that were being preached at Mass or being taught in religion class really didn't resonate. Even though I thought that I knew the Bible forwards and backwards and just all the names for God and all those types of things. So it came to a point where when I graduated from high school and I was about to embark on university, I saw that as an opportunity for me to really sever myself from God and be like, I'm going to go to this very liberal university that has a radical history to it. And I'm just going to put God aside. I'm just going to like run away and forget that that was ever a part of my identity. And I like to joke that I could run, but God could run faster, because it was probably the second day of my undergrad where I was face to face with a couple Catholic groups on campus. And I just couldn't believe it. I saw all their smiling faces. And, there was a part of me that kind of felt jealous, where I was like, why are they Catholic and happy, whereas I was Catholic and sad, or just Catholic and depressed? Like, I didn't get it. But like they had really reached out to me with a warmth to them, and they invited me to take some faith studies. And this group that invited me is called Catholic Christian Outreach, which we were chatting earlier. So Catholic Christian Outreach is our equivalent of Focus, but here in Canada. And I saw it as an opportunity to continue my head knowledge of Jesus, and just kind of like, like I can learn about Jesus and know everything about Jesus. So I did it. I kind of went through all these studies thinking that this was me like growing my Jesus brain. But despite that, like, they would invite me to things like, a pizza social or a board game night or like Eucharistic adoration, which at the time I had no idea what it was. And I would never go. I would make up really bad excuses to just not go to these social events, because I felt like the moment I would enter into that space, I would be marked as like a sinner. It's like, who is this person? She's never around. Like, she doesn't have a solid faith background. We don't see her at masses on campus. Like, she's a fraud. Like, we don't want to spend time with her. So, I would always keep a distance. And my only kind of lifeline was through those faith studies. Fast forward a couple years to 2016, I was really in a very difficult place with regards to academics, and my own like physical health and mental health was kind of going downhill to the point where, I was super depressed and super anxious. And towards the end of 2016, probably after the semester ended, like I was incredibly sick over Christmas. And because of that, like I pretty much missed all of the Christmas celebrations because I was like in bed, I was sick and nauseous and all these types of things. And in that moment, like in that moment and feeling a lot of despair, like I really felt this call, or what I thought was an invitation to end my life right then and there, just because it just didn't seem like there was any purpose for my life. And now the funny thing was, a couple months prior, I was invited to go to a conference that Catholic Christian Outreach was holding. And it's very similar to a conference that Focus holds. So again, at the end of the year, it's 5 days. And that year it was actually in Vancouver. So on a whim, I actually was convinced by a CCO missionary to go. And, as I was getting closer, I was sick, and I was really starting to think of all the ways that I could get out of it. just because I was so worried that I would be going to this conference, even though it was in my hometown. I was going to this conference and I knew no one. So I was going to be alone for 5 days, and I paid so much money to go. And I was just like, what is happening? What am I going to do? But in that despair, I kind of saw that maybe this was my way out. And, like, even though like I felt this conviction that maybe this was the way out, there was what I could only describe as like this very irrational peace that was kind of holding me back. And it's just like, well, hold on, slow down and see this through, see this year through, go to the conference. So I went, just like super like depressed the whole way there, just trying to figure out my way. And the moment I got there, I was, first of all, very frightened just because I didn't know anyone. But very quickly, what I noticed was all of these happy Catholics again. And I was just like, happy Catholics again. It's like, these people are following me and I don't get it. But what quickly happened was that these happy Catholics, they saw me, but they didn't see me as like, a broken person, or they didn't label me as like a bad Catholic or a sad Catholic. Mm-hmm. And they welcomed me in with such like arms of love. And it was really beautiful. So I started to really feel like I belonged for the first time. And, we had this moment for Eucharistic adoration. So, up until this point, I had never done it. So this was the very first time that I had done it. And we had this opportunity to bask in the glory of Jesus present in the Blessed Sacrament. And I was so moved just because this, like, to answer your question, this was probably the first time that I saw Jesus like face to face, not just like Jesus up here and I'm kind of like back here. Like literally we were face to face for the first time. And that really compelled me to go and make a very clear and honest confession, one that I hadn't made in a very long time. So I went and I lined up. I was thinking about what I was going to say, jogging my memory about the act of contrition, which I'd forgotten already.
Yeah.
But then I went and I shared everything that was going on in my life, like all of like my own suffering, my anger towards God, that he just wasn't coming through for me. And the fact that I, thought of committing suicide a couple times. And I thought that, the moment I said that, surely this was the moment that I would be excommunicated from the church. But instead, what happened was the priest looked back at me with eyes of love. Like it was like, just chatting with Jesus and being honest with him. And he said, you are loved. I love you, and welcome home. And then, as I was getting up to leave, the priest said, like, I want you to know that you have an identity in him. And I guess I'll close with the fact that, like, what really clicked for me in that moment was just that I was seen by him. Like, in a church of like, 1.2 billion Catholics, in a world of 7 billion people, I was seen and known by him. And the theme of that year's conference was Rise Up, or excuse me, sorry, we'll cut that out. The name of the conference is Rise Up, but the theme of the conference came from the prophet Isaiah chapter 43, which is called by name. So it's like he knew me, like he knew my name, and he knew me inside and out. But yeah, so like that's kind of been my life ever since, and I haven't looked back. And certainly, like, there have been difficult moments here and there. But I guess the biggest difference is that even in my suffering, I know who God is and who I am and whose I am, which really is the biggest difference.
Wow. Wow, Rachel. Oh my gosh. That's an incredible story. That is just incredibly powerful. I love the way you described how you were actually running away from him and he ran faster. I mean, it's just so interesting to me that you even noticed those happy Catholics on your campus. I think that even in itself says so much, because I know, at least for me, like when I was in college, I don't know whether it was just I wasn't looking or I wasn't time, but I didn't notice that in college. So the fact that you even noticed that, I think, was his way of reaching out to your heart and
Absolutely.
piquing your interest. So what, if you can remember, what made
Yes.
you decide to do that first faith study? Because you had left, you'd left home, you're going to, this liberal college almost purposely to try to avoid, your faith. What was it that made you say yes when you first got invited to do a faith study?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I think it's one thing that I've always reflected on, ever since I kind of like made my, reconversion back to the faith and thinking about the content of those faith studies, because, years after, I still am leading those same studies that I took in my university years, which is so great. But I really saw it as an opportunity to, like I was saying, like grow my Jesus brain and kind of maybe I don't know why I had to, but I guess what it was that like I wanted to show that I knew something about being a Catholic. So I thought that this was my way in, even though like there was certainly a part of me where I was just kind of like, I don't need to prove anything to these people because I was trying to distance myself.
Right.
But I guess it was that, because we all have this desire to belong. And at that time, like, given the fact that, I was just starting university, I didn't really have any friends. And I was like trying to find my way on the campus. So I thought that this would be an opportunity to meet new people, but also to just kind of prove myself and prove my worth to other people, that I kind of knew what was going on. And it's funny because probably in the first, I would say 4 semesters, I was able to advance pretty quickly in the studies while, also keeping a social distance from them before social distancing was even happening. Um, but really, like, it's probably one of the greatest paradoxes of my life. And I can only attribute it to the fact that, God has always been there, even when I thought that I was all alone. He would still find a way to walk alongside me, even though I was trying to push him away. He was very persistent, but persistent in a way that still allowed me choice and freedom. And that really is like what God's love is, right? Like he gives us that free will to choose, and he wants us to choose him, but he will never force himself onto us. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because I feel like it's different for everybody, but you clearly, yeah, I think that was meant to happen, that you kind of kept this line of these space studies, even when everything else was kind of, not building upon itself, but that little thread was still there.
Yes.
That is how you got that invitation to go to that conference, because you kept that thread alive.
Absolutely.
And then there was something in you that knew in the depths of maybe your soul somewhere that if I give this conference a try, this, like you were saying, this could be my healing. Maybe I'll give it a chance. I'll see the year through. I'll give this one last chance. And the Lord showed up in a big way.
He did.
And what was your beliefs, I guess, like when you got there and you said, that for the first time you sat face to face with him, did you believe that in your heart at that time, that this was him in the form of the Blessed Sacrament? Or were you kind of like, oh, I'll just like do this because everyone else here is doing this, but
Yeah. Well, I think it's a beautiful question to ask, just because, one of the things that I am really grateful for, despite the kind of roundabout way that I found my faith, one of the things that I have always been grateful for is my belief in the non-negotiable fact that Jesus really is present in the bread and the wine. So we know, that in Catholic tradition, like that is not just a symbol, like it is him fully present, body, blood, soul, and divinity, right? So in my heart, I kind of saw that and I knew that, okay, this is, something that I've known deep in my heart. But I guess the interesting part of it is that because Eucharistic adoration was something that I'd never done before, all of the new friends that I had met over the first couple of days of the conference, they were talking about, Eucharistic adoration, and people were sharing their stories of how they're constantly crying, or people are getting slain in the spirit, or, they have these visions, or they have these massive breakthroughs. And to be honest, I was starting to feel really freaked out. I was just like, what have I walked into? Like, is this a cult, or like, is what's going on? Like, what are you all talking about? Like, all of this terminology that I didn't have any vocabulary for. And, people were just like, one of my newfound friends, seeing that I was a little like, whoa, like, what's going on? He was like to me, he's like, oh, like, don't be scared. The Lord will show up in the way that he will for you. And it will be very particular for you. So I kind of took comfort in that, knowing that, okay, well, Lord, you know that this is my first time. I've never done Eucharistic adoration before. So I'm going to trust that you're not going to overwhelm me. And I can honestly say that, like you said, he certainly showed up, but also he was very gentle, right? Because all around me, I could see that, people were already crying, the tissues were coming out, and people were furiously journaling, and people were lying prostrate in front of the monstrance. And I was kind of kneeling there and thinking, okay, if it's you, I would love to have a word with you, so to speak. And he did. He came, and I could actually see him. Maybe not necessarily like the face of Jesus, kind of like looking back at me, but it was almost like, I'm looking at the monstrance. And how sometimes you can have a nonverbal conversation with a very good friend. You can just look at them and you kind of just know what's going on. That's exactly what it felt like, even though, I could honestly say prior to that, I really had no concept of what it meant to talk to Jesus, or that you could even talk to Jesus. But to just hear him like really pour into my heart these truths about me that I didn't even know were truths, and really dispelling a lot of lies that I told about myself, and then encouraging me to go meet him again in the sacrament of reconciliation. So it was really an intimate moment with him, to just kind of be there and to sit with him. And again, it's like when you are with a good friend, sometimes you can just sit in silence and it's not awkward. And that's kind of what it was. It's like we were just sitting and I was just basking in his presence, and the light, it was just, this is my favorite part about Eucharistic adoration, is just that the light knows where to hit the monstrance, and it's just like, it will make it so radiant and beautiful. Wow. So yeah, like that was kind of my first experience with that, and really seeing Jesus there.
And I love how you say that it inspired you and sparked you to the sacrament of confession. I mean, I think that that's just so beautiful how, you just received his love so purely. And then you just like wanted for you, for it to be healed. And that's just so beautiful how he led you right there and just brought you to this conference where it was all going to be there for you. Because I think a lot of times too, when you're not, at this place where there's adoration and confession right at your fingertips, it's like there's a lot of back and forth, and I mean, even spiritual warfare that goes on between the moment you have this encounter with Jesus in prayer and it's amazing, and then the moment you get the courage to go to confession. So I feel like that was just so beautiful how, how he worked through the people in your life, and then how he extended this little invitation where he knew you'd be in a safe place and in a safe community to be able to start to heal all of those wounds that you had. So that's just, that's amazing. Yeah. And so then from there, so what happened after you had this incredible encounter, went to confession? Were your friends like, did they know what was happening? Did you share kind of what was going on, or were you kind of just pondering this all in your heart and trying to figure it all out? What happened next?
For sure. Yeah. So I remember literally the day the conference ended, it was New Year's Day. And the funny thing was my parents had invited one of my childhood best friends and her family over. So I just have this vivid memory of, literally we were sitting on my bed and I was just kind of pouring out everything that had happened to her. And now, like, we had went to elementary school together, so Catholic elementary school together for a couple of years, but then she had moved away and she entered into the public system. So the extent of her faith, I would say that, like, she went through the sacraments, but probably wasn't practicing. So, to have that conversation and to be so fearless in that, like, really it was the grace of God.
Yeah.
But what I found was that over time, one of the beautiful things that came out of this experience was that I suddenly had this newfound community of friends that I could journey with. Because I think, given a lot of the experiences that I had in high school, not only was I trying to sever myself from God at the time, but quite honestly, there were a lot of relationships that I knew that I couldn't continue after I left high school just because of how toxic they were. And at first, I really felt, super alone. Like, I think, especially as a young woman at that time, to admit to yourself that you have no friends is very depressing in itself. And it just kind of like, is this really my life? Like, I've got no friends and I'm just destined to be like this. But really, God had created so much space in my heart for this brand new community. And in turn, they had adopted me in. So, when I think about a lot of the close friends that I have now, all of them I had met in some way or another through Catholic Christian Outreach from that conference. And from there, it has been a really great opportunity to journey with people, because I think what I saw was that just because you're Catholic, it doesn't mean that you're perfect. And I had to learn that the hard way too, because my eyes were open to that when I arrived at the conference, that, wait a second, these are real people with real struggles. And yes, they are happy, but it's more so like a joy. It's a joy about knowing who they are, not because they have everything figured out, not because they are perfect. Yeah. And then, once I came to that realization and had that encounter for myself, it was then a process of learning about, okay, like, I know that I'm not perfect. So how do I continue on that journey? Like, how am I going to build myself up that way? And I realized that I don't do that alone. I have to work with God, but also B, like, God provides these communities for us so that we can grow in fellowship, right? In scripture, it says that iron sharpens iron. And I have found that that is certainly time and time again so true, with the amount of, like, female friendships that I found in this community to help me grow into a better woman and a better sister. But also, like, through meeting, like, actual virtuous men, because I had my own struggles with, like, relationships and turmoil and that, and some trauma that came from dating relationships. And I really thought that there were no good men out there. But then to see that there are men who knew Christ and knew their identity, and the fact that we're all striving for holiness. So, I'm so grateful for that. And just the fact that God had really answered one of the deepest desires of my heart, was to feel like I belonged and to have friends who I could journey with in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that's another whole aspect of, like, bringing you to that conference is, like, a built-in community that had been there really the whole time waiting for you. It was just a matter of, it happening. And so I think that was I think you so beautifully illustrated just how he's been there the whole time, just kind of waiting for your response. And then when you respond, having everything, knowing exactly what you needed on that journey back to, and healing. So that's amazing. So you were in college when you went to that conference still,
yes,
right? And
that's right.
What year was that? Were you a sophomore or?
So that was 2016. So I was in my second year. And now I do apologize, because here in Canada, we don't use those terms.
Oh,
and I'm
sorry.
kind of like, no, it's totally fine. So I always feel bad. I'm just kind of like, I think
second
I'm
year.
A sophomore.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
That is sophomore. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So then the next 2 years you had to still kind of had this community and to grow and to kind of, develop your faith and deeper, kind of fall into it deeper and have this, iron around you, sharpening you, which is just amazing. So when you were getting ready to graduate,
yes.
Yeah. So what was going on at that time, and kind of when you went out into the world? I guess what were some of your biggest challenges in cultivating a relationship with him, and what have been some of your greatest joys?
So at this point, I'll be totally transparent and actually say that my degree, I used to think it was a bit of a curse, but thanks be to God, it took 6 years. So I actually am, when I say graduate, I'm a pretty fresh graduate at the time of recording this.
Yeah.
So I'm the class of 2020, class of
Okay.
COVID.
Wow.
But what I will say is, thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate that. What I will say is that, like, in terms of challenges, certainly, like, one of the big things that had always been on my mind as I was getting close to graduation was just, how am I going to continue having those types of relationships and community? Because, it's one thing to be on campus and to continually go to, on our campus, we have something called the Interfaith Center, where we would always congregate and meet. So that's a familiar place to always go back to for community. But once you get out into the world, like, I was very keenly aware of the fact that this was not always going to be the case. We would enter into workplaces that are not Catholic and in fact are very secular. You may meet people, you may have to work alongside people who don't share your beliefs. So that was definitely, for me, I was really worried about that and really kind of sad that, God had blessed me with this gift. And now all of a sudden it seemed like it was going to be taken away. Mm-hmm. And I say that I'm thankful that it was a 6-year degree, just because because of maybe my own prolonging of the degree, I was able to spend a little bit more time with it, as I was studying, and then continuing to be with the community. And I think, like, in terms of the greatest joys, God had really blessed me with this opportunity to go on a mission with Catholic Christian Outreach. So last January 2019, we went on a mission to World Youth Day. And I think the funniest thing about this mission was that it was targeted towards alumni of Catholic Christian Outreach. So students who were on a campus that had CCO and they have since graduated, they're working in the workforce. Now, I was taking that semester off just because of some personal issues. And I was encouraged to apply by a couple missionaries, but the one thing that was deterring me was the fact that it was targeted towards alumni. And I told the missionaries, I was like, look, like, I'm not even close to graduating. They're never going to take me. But by the grace of God, they did. I applied and they took me. And sure enough, I was the only person on that team of 9 that was still in school. There was one guy on that team who said, he's like, yeah, I'm studying right now and I'm going back to school in a couple months. And I was like, oh, like, what are you doing your undergrad in? And he's like, well, I did my undergrad in, I'm so sorry, like, I can't even remember, but all this to say, he was actually a master's student. And I was just like, all these people have degrees and jobs. Like, I don't even have a degree. And here I am on this. So again, kind of feeling like that imposter syndrome. But it was such a blessing because, again, it's like, these folks really, they didn't see age. And it didn't matter to them that I was still technically in school. And again, God had blessed me not with just with this beautiful group of people, and we're still so tight. Like, we visit each other, we talk to each other a lot. But also he showed me that this is what it looks like to live out your faith after you leave the walls of the school, and that it's possible, and it's possible to flourish like that as long as you have that community. So taking part in young adult ministry, keeping in touch with these friends has really given me hope. So I would say that certainly there have been challenges, but the joys that have come from them really have outweighed those challenges. And they've really sustained me as I've gone through the last little part of my degree. And, to be here now, and I remember when I finally presented my thesis, I went back to our little group chat among the 9 of us from that mission. And I was like, I'm a real alumni now. Like, I can finally join your ranks and I feel legit. And, it was really special because I felt like God was really preparing me and molding me. And now, kind of as I am stepping into the real world, so to speak, I do feel a lot more confident than if I, had really rushed to finish my degree in 4 years and then kind of stepped out and had no idea where I was going.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. And I think you're right. He was trying to show you, that community doesn't have to end just because, you're leaving this community, but
Mm-hmm.
it's about living out your faith. Yeah. No matter what season or stage of life you're in, and trusting, right? Like trusting
Mm-hmm.
in God that he's going to give you what you need for that season. And it's going to
Mm-hmm.
look different, but that doesn't mean that it's going to go away, which is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a beautiful, like, kind of lesson he taught you through that. But,
Yeah.
yeah. So then when did you start the Feminine Genius podcast? Because that must have been somewhere in the midst of all of this. And how did that come about?
Absolutely. Yes. So it was also actually a beautiful gift of that mission that I went on with CCO. So, coming into 2019, I really had this deep, deep desire in my heart to know what my vocation was. So I was thinking more along the lines of, God, can you show me if you're calling me to marriage or you're calling me to discern a religious vocation?
Mm.
And, I thought that I would really dedicate my year to him to really show me that. So what I noticed while I was there at World Youth Day, and like every moment we had an opportunity to pray, I was constantly just really bugging God about this. It's like, okay, can you just tell me now so I can kind of fast track myself to whatever that vocation is. But what I noticed was that he was instead, like, a lot of different things were coming into my mind. Most of which were just memories of women that I had met over time or I knew who had beautiful stories and had beautiful ideas and were really living out what it meant to be a Catholic woman, and just people that I looked up to. And then, of course, it's like all of these like random things like music and just how I could maybe present these stories, because I've always been a storyteller and I've always loved writing, and like I have a background in radio broadcast. So I thought that it would be a great way to maybe integrate these things. But I was getting frustrated with myself while I was at World Youth Day, just because it's like, okay, like I'm here to pray about my vocation. Can't we stop with all of these women coming in, like they're cool, but it's like they're cool, but we need to focus on me right now.
Like, and Lord, pay attention. Hello, we have something else we're dealing
exactly with. Right. It's kind of like, I'm telling him to focus, but also I was kind of like, being a true Canadian, I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like I'm getting so distracted. I'm so sorry. So
sorry.
So, this followed me for months, and I was just I was very confused, and I was getting nowhere closer to figuring out what my vocation was. And finally, it was on a visit to my friends who were living in Ontario from that mission. We were at an adoration chapel that is attached to my friend's parish. And, we're praying there in the Blessed Sacrament, in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And it was there where, again, I was, really trying to open up my heart and be like, Lord, like whatever my vocation is, I would love it if you just kind of laid it out for me and we can just go there. But instead, again, all of these things started to come up in my mind. And finally, I was so frustrated, and I was just kind of like, okay, what is going on? Enough. Like, we got to stop this. And I really, again, like started to engage in this dialogue with the Lord. And, all of these things, like over the past couple months, as much as I was frustrated that I was getting nowhere in my prayer for discernment, I could start to feel this cultivation of what seemed to be a project of some sort, some kind of storytelling project. It involved women. And I was just like, Lord, podcasts? Like, what? And it's one of those things where, again, like, that nonverbal communication in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and it's almost as if he's just kind of like, he gives like a shrug, a knowing look, and I start to unload all of these worries and these these inadequacies that I thought that I had, where it's like I had no time, I had no money, I had no equipment. But my biggest worry was the fact that I didn't have a name for this project. I'm huge on names. As if that's the biggest thing I should worry about.
I love that. Because it's like it's almost like you already knew you were going to do it. Because you're like, oh, but what am I going to name it?
Exactly. It's just like, what am I even going to do here? And he, very clearly I could hear him say, like, you already know. So I was like, I already know. So I'm kind of like, going into my memory and just kind of thinking about it really hard. And it was on the way back to my friend's place. The minute we got in to her house and I was connected to her Wi-Fi, I was just firing off a Google search on the feminine genius. And what had occurred to me was that I was listening to Abiding Together, beautiful podcast.
So
Heather Kim, Michelle Benzinger, Sister Miriam James. And it was on my way to Ottawa that I was listening to their series on the feminine genius. Now, full disclosure, I was on the train, so I was probably kind of like, in and out of consciousness. I was, maybe napping a little bit. Nothing about the content, but I was just so tired because of the travels. So I remember being so intrigued by that name, but clearly I wasn't listening well enough. Because I remember thinking to myself, it's like, wow, like the Abiding Together women should really trademark that term, feminine genius, because it's so beautiful. Now, once I kind of back to the present day, I was doing that Google search and I saw that it wasn't just Abiding Together that was doing it, but the number one person that it pointed back to was John Paul II, like the great John Paul II. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I started to do a deep dive into this. And of course, I stumbled upon his letter to women. So written, over 20 years ago, but still so relevant today.
Yeah, so good. Yes.
And it really spoke to my heart. And it spoke to, again, this wound that I'd carried for a really long time, which was that I knew that I was a Catholic woman and I had never questioned my identity as a woman, or I had never questioned my femininity, but I had no idea what it meant to truly live an authentic Catholic femininity. I thought that, given my own sins and my own barriers, my inadequacies at baking and what have you, I thought that I wasn't a good Catholic woman, right? I didn't see myself in other women at church or women that I saw online who were Catholic. And reading that letter and just understanding that actually there is a multiplicity of ways to be Catholic and a woman. And that every single way that you are, which is ourselves, our truest selves, it is needed and it's necessary for God's church. And in that moment, as I was reading the letter, it really inspired in me, just at confirmation, it's the reading from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, where he talks about one body, many parts. And, all of these things were really clicking for me because it made me realize that, if the whole body of Christ was just an I, AKA one type of Catholic woman, sure, it's maybe the church would have a lot of fantastic baking and cookies and whatnot, but it wasn't the only way to do it. And in fact, it would render that body not totally free to really live out the genius of woman. And of course, this is not to say that homemakers and bakers, women who can bake, are not useful. Of course, it's we need those women, but we also need women in science, in medicine. We need women who do podcasts. We need women who can do hard labor, and we need women in the medical field, and we need women who are homemakers. We need all of it. It takes all of us to really build up the kingdom of God here on earth. Yeah. So that's what started it. And that was the beginning of May, so about this time last year. And in a month, he really just blew wide all the doors. And it was crazy because I had started and failed so many previous podcast projects that hadn't made it past month one. And now at the time of recording this, we're about almost a year into the project.
Wow.
And it's amazing to see with, my kind of reserved yes, ? How he's able to turn that into something really beautiful. And I'm blown away by the response and the ministry itself. So
yeah. Oh gosh, it's so true. It's it just at least for me too, it was he put so many things in my path that made it it made it impossible not to do it. It was so,
exactly.
I was laughing to myself a lot of times during it because I'd be really, Lord, okay, you really want me to ask? I get it. You want me to ask this person. But it's so funny how yeah, when it's meant to be, he definitely makes sure there's a
Hmm.
way that it's done. So that's beautiful. I love everything that you talked about, just how he clearly was communicating to you and nudging you along the whole
Hmm.
way, but at the same time wanted you to find it yourself and in your own time. And then it's fun too, because that's the creative side of it too. It's right. It's like, oh, here's
Absolutely.
the premise, and now it's like you get to, exactly like you're saying, like you get to decide the music, what it sounds like, what it looks like, how it feels. So yeah, that's beautiful. And thank you for giving your yes to that. So many amazing episodes, so many great conversations. The people he's putting in your path, it's very obvious that it's the work of the Holy Spirit for sure. And you're reaching so many women, and it's just, yeah, it's amazing what he can do, right? When we give our little yes, when there's a little bit of a tug in your heart, just follow that through, because there's something there, that he's trying to communicate. And thank you so much too, just for being so open and vulnerable about mental health and
Hmm.
your journey with that, and how your faith has played a role in that. Do you want to talk any more about that? Just what that journey
Yeah,
was like, I guess, after meeting the Lord. I
certainly.
know it's not like a one and done deal that you meet Jesus and all your problems go away, right?
For sure. Yeah, no, thank you for that invitation. Like it always is such a great, it's a privilege for me to chat about this just because, first and foremost, like you were saying, it's never like a one and done thing. But what I can say is that when I had that encounter with Jesus for the first time, what I did see was that a lot of the physical manifestations of, my mental health that I was experiencing, whether it was like literally there would be days where I would just be like just shaking, like physically shaking from anxiety,
Mm.
like, and those like tremors, like a lot of it disappeared. I was getting migraines and headaches a lot of the time. A lot of those, the first little bit I was kind of like, okay, well, it'll be back tomorrow. And, the next day would come. It's like, it'll be back tomorrow. But suddenly I was a month in, I was like, maybe it won't be back tomorrow. And sure enough, like, God was able to eradicate a lot of things
Mm.
physically. But of course, that's not to say that the journey kind of ends there and that suddenly you're healed. And I think that that has been one of the steepest learning curves that I had to learn, was just that, when it comes to mental health in particular, like your healing in itself is not linear, right? Like it's not a one and done thing. And it has to continually build because we as humans continue to change and we're constantly impacted by the different stimuli that are in our world. So it really has been an opportunity for me to grow in trust with the Lord, and maybe like also come to the understanding and the recognition that I did need to seek even more professional help. Yeah, like I really did need to seek help. Like that's really the first thing, and to not be ashamed that I need to get help or to
Mm.
start taking medication. And of course, it's like you really have to do your research and really like have very open and honest conversations with whoever your healthcare providers are, to just talk about things so that you can make fully informed decisions.
Mhm.
Um, but from there, it was kind of like once I was able to deal with the immediate, issues, like the health issues that were in front of me, then I could start to kind of venture into maybe the more spiritual side of suffering. Because I think that sometimes one of the frustrations that I've encountered or other people have encountered when I've chatted with them about mental health and faith is that we can get almost into this like over spiritualizing area of suffering, and we kind of maybe spiritualize it too much, and all of a sudden we're like up here when we haven't even figured out what's going on around us just yet. So I think it has been a very long process of first understanding like me at a physiological level, and also like how can I, whether it's like through like therapy and whatnot, like how can I like train myself, train my brain into thinking better thoughts, thinking more positively about myself, and inviting myself into just this area of like self love and understanding who I am and whose I am, And then from there, being able to journey with God into understanding, okay, like I've been given the suffering throughout my life, and, understanding why that is, what good can come out of this suffering. And I think one of the beautiful meditations that I've had with this is, like, shortly after my conversion, I was doing this meditation on the Stations of the Cross with a group of young adults. And we were asked to think about, as we approached every station, let Jesus introduce you to a memory that has happened in your life, good or bad, whatever it might be. Just allow him to speak to you through that, and really try and picture and see where Jesus was in that memory. And the first, stations 1 to 12, every memory was a bad memory for me. And, all throughout, I was getting very suspicious. I was just like, okay, like, whether it was like, bullying, or a grandparent had passed away, or I did poorly on a test, I had a fight with my parents or a friend or a sister. And, in my mind, I was just like, okay, I can't see God in any of these circumstances. And finally, we made it to the station where Jesus dies on the cross. And, like, Jesus's words on the cross, like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Those are my words too. I was just like, Lord, where have you been in my suffering? And we continued on, and we went to the final station where, like, the tomb is empty, and we talk about the resurrection. And in that moment, I realized that, even in suffering, Jesus 3 days later was still able to redeem everybody's suffering by taking on the wounds and the sins of everybody else. He was able to really glorify and show the world, the fact that there is redemption in suffering. And I was just like, well, if Jesus can do that with the sins of every last person here on earth, then certainly he can do that with my suffering. And it really has been an invitation that he's extended to me to just be like, okay, so let's journey through this together. So it hasn't been easy, but it has been very fruitful, in a sense that, even in my suffering, I've been able to find Jesus there, and to see how he has been able to transform suffering for good. And whether it's like, being able to, share my own story with someone and have it resonate, or even to just be trusted by other people, sometimes even strangers, for them to share their story with me, and to be able to either pray with them, or, share some insight, or just share something that's on my heart to help to, keep them going, has really been such a blessing. And I can see that Jesus is at work, even in the suffering, in my own suffering and that of others.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for just opening up and sharing that, because I think, it's so true that the darkness is not of God. It's like when we bring things to the light and we share our own experiences, it can only help, to heal them and to heal others, just like you were saying. So thank you for sharing that. So it's not easy, and I know it takes a lot of courage. So thank you. What have been some of your standout influences on your journey so far? Whether it's a book or a podcast, or I know you've mentioned a few, the conference obviously was a huge one. CCO, obviously huge. But if you have any other specific ones that have helped you, I'd love to hear them.
Oh, for sure. Yes. I think first and foremost, what comes to mind is, like, within CCO, of course, there was a missionary. Her name is Maria. And, when I think back on my own journey, I tell her this a lot, that I would never be where I am if it wasn't for her persistence, because really she was like, acting in the person of God. And I mean that in a sense that, even though I made terrible excuses to not go to different social events, she would still treat me with respect and dignity. She would never treat me any differently. And even after I would give a horrible excuse, whenever she would see me, we would have great conversations, and she would continually invite me to go to events, and I would always say no or whatever. And in fact, she was the one that introduced me to this conference and invited me to. And I look back on it, and it's almost maybe because like she had asked so many times, and she had been consistent in showing to me what God's love looks like in the flesh. So in many ways, like I trusted her, and I was just like, okay, well, yes, like I'll go, I'll consider it. I'll talk to my parents about it, and I'll do it. And, like if it wasn't for her persistence, I would never be where I am, because I know myself, and like sometimes I ask 2 times and then I'll just give up on something or someone, right? But she had really pursued me for almost 2 years. And I was just like, wow, like that is patience and that is love. And that really is, literally the good shepherd, right? He's going off like he'll leave the 99 behind in search of the one. And in CCO, we always talk about, one person at a time, one heart at a time. And, she really is the embodiment of that. So I'm grateful for her. But I would also say too, like, Venerable Fulton Sheen is probably one of my all-time favorites. Like shortly after I came to like a more fuller conversion and understanding of who God is, like I had stumbled upon his videos on YouTube. And again, like, he's talking about all of these things that are still so relevant, and his passion and his fire and the way that he presents ideas is just so captivating. And of course, it's like the tell for me that this was like old stuff, so to speak, was that it was a black and white video. These are videos from the 50s, and yet, like, 60 years later, still so relevant. And like, what a powerful man of God, who just knew how to communicate the values and theology in such a great and simple way. So as a communicator myself, like I really appreciate like his influence over me. And I would say that maybe the last thing that really, I guess like that comes to mind for this question was shortly after my conversion as well, I was introduced to this book called Captivating by John and Stasi Eldridge. And it's a beautiful book, again, about like Catholic femininity and what it means to be a daughter of God. And it's funny as I'm thinking about it too, just because this was probably 2017, so far before the podcast was even in my imagination. But, that idea of Catholic femininity and how like, we are daughters first and God delights in us, even if we have sinned, like no matter how many times we have sinned, like we have that freedom to come back. And he will still love us like unconditionally. So, given all the wounds that were in my own heart, like that was such a powerful book to remind me of that identity and that worth that I have inherently through him.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
Beautiful book.
I love that too, that he was planting seeds in your heart about feminine, beauty and genius way before it came on the scene for you. And I love how he does that.
Absolutely.
So where can someone go to find out more about you and to find the Feminine Genius podcast if they want to?
For sure. So everything is housed on my website, which is femininegeniuspodcast.com. You can find the Feminine Genius podcast on pretty much any podcast platform. So like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, all those fun things. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Fem Genius Pod. So FEMGENIUSPOD.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. And the last question that I hope to ask everyone who comes on is, can you share with us one scripture verse that has either played a foundational role in your journey so far or that is speaking to you recently, and why?
Beautiful. So when you sent that to me, I was really thinking about that, just because my default answer is the whole Bible, but I know I haven't read through the whole thing yet, so I can't really say that. But, like it's so beautiful how the Lord works again, because shortly after my conversion, I came across this passage from St. Peter's first letter. And it's First Peter chapter 5, verse 7, which is cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And the way that, the use of the word anxiety was so striking to me when I first read it, because it was almost as if, like, Jesus knew that had been something I had suffered with for a very long time. And, to be frank, like, even to this day, I still suffer from that. But I guess, like, the biggest thing that really inspired me about that was just the fact that, even in my suffering, even all the anxious thoughts that I have about whatever it might be, I can cast it all on him. I can just give it to him. And I think for so long, I'd really been holding on to it for myself because I thought that he couldn't redeem that part of me. So I was just kind of like, slowly drowning with it on my own. But this passage really spoke to me and just showed me that I can give it to him because he cares for me, because he loves me. And because of that, like, he has the power to take that away. So it was just so striking to see, like, literally Jesus was very pointedly saying, it's like, you can give this to me and I will take care of it. And I was like, okay, Lord, I will give it to you.
Yes.
And that'll be that, right? So every day is a moment of surrender. And it's a good reminder to me every day whenever I'm feeling anxious about work or school at the time, or, just what's going to be next now that I'm kind of in this, like, transitional phase of my life. Like, I can give you my anxiety and we will tackle this together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It does. It feels so good when there's something so healing about that too, when you just invite him in and let him help you carry the burden, you're doing it together, which I think is what's so beautiful about how you talk about him. It's very clear that you have this kind of joint relationship where you tackle things together. And I thank you. Just thank you for sharing your whole story and for opening up. And that was incredible. So thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on. It was a fantastic conversation.
Oh, Rachel, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing as well.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for growing some good with us today. Visit us at togrowgood.com/podcast to find links to everything we mentioned in our conversation. Find us on Instagram at togrowgood. See you next week.